Rejected on a blind date for being too fat, a poor girl sat in silence, until a single dad from the next table walked up to her. Lena kept her hands folded in her lap, as if holding them still might stop the trembling inside her. The cafe felt louder now, every laugh too sharp, every clink of a cup too close. Just minutes earlier, she had been sitting upright, nodding politely, trying to make conversation flow. Now the chair across from her was empty, pushed back carelessly, as if the man couldn't wait to put distance between them. She replayed the moment again and again. The way his eyes flicked over her body, quick and judgmental. The pause before his smile faded. The careful words chosen to sound kind while still cutting deep. "You're nice, but I don't think this will work." Nice. Always nice. Never enough. Lena stared at the condensation sliding down her glass of water, wishing she could disappear into the table. She had known better than to hope. Blind dates were always a gamble, and for someone like her, the odds were rarely in her favor. Still, a small part of her had dared to imagine something different tonight. She had worn her favorite sweater, the one that felt soft instead of tight. She had brushed her hair until it shone. She had practiced answering questions without sounding apologetic for existing. It hadn't mattered. Her phone buzzed with a message from her roommate asking how the date was going. Lena didn't answer. She didn't have the energy to explain, and she was tired of pretending it didn't hurt. Being rejected wasn't new, but the ache never really faded. It just settled deeper, becoming familiar, like a bruise you stop checking even though it's still there. She felt the weight of people around her, imagined their glances, even though most of them were too busy with their own lives to notice. Still, shame had a way of making the world feel like a spotlight. She shifted in her chair, debating whether to leave immediately or wait a few minutes so it wouldn't look so obvious. That was when a shadow fell across the table. Lena looked up, startled, ready to apologize for something she hadn't done. Instead, she saw a man standing there, tall but not imposing, with tired eyes and a gentle expression. He didn't look at her the way others did. His gaze was steady, respectful, as if he were speaking to a person, not a problem to be solved. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "I don't mean to intrude." She swallowed and nodded, unsure what else to do. "I couldn't help noticing," he continued, lowering his voice, "that your date left rather suddenly. I just wanted to check if you're okay." The question caught her off guard. Not because it was complicated, but because no one usually asked it sincerely. Lena forced a small smile. "I will be," she said, the automatic response slipping out before she could stop it. The man didn't push. He gestured to the empty chair. "Would it be all right if I sat for a moment? If not, that's completely fine." She hesitated. Part of her wanted to be alone, to wallow quietly until she could escape. Another part, the part that was tired of being invisible, nodded before she could overthink it. "Okay. For a minute." He sat down slowly, as if careful not to make her uncomfortable. Up close, she noticed faint lines around his eyes, the kind that came from smiling often or worrying deeply. There was something calm about him, something grounding. "I'm Daniel," he said. "And I promise, I'm not here to fix anything." That made her let out a small, surprised laugh. "Good. Because I'm not fixable." He smiled, not offended. "I don't believe that." They sat in silence for a few seconds, and strangely, it wasn't awkward. Lena felt her shoulders relax just a little. "I saw how he left," Daniel said gently. "I'm sorry." She shrugged, staring at the table. "It happens." "That doesn't make it easier," he replied. She glanced at him, really looking this time. "No. It doesn't." From the corner of her eye, she noticed a little girl at the next table, swinging her legs and coloring intensely. Daniel followed her gaze and smiled. "That's my daughter. Emma. She's very serious about her art." Lena felt something soften in her chest. She's talented, she said, though she could only see a jumble of colors. Daniel chuckled. According to her, yes. They talked about small things then. The cafe. The weather. How hard it was to find good coffee. It felt easy, like slipping into a conversation that didn't require her to perform. She didn't feel the need to impress him or hide parts of herself. After a pause, Lena spoke without meaning to. He said he wasn't attracted to me. Daniel didn't look away. That's his loss. She shook her head. People always say that, but it doesn't feel true when it keeps happening. He considered her words carefully. Maybe, he said, it's not happening because something is wrong with you. Maybe it's happening because the wrong people keep getting access to you. The thought lingered, unfamiliar but comforting. Daniel glanced back at his daughter, who was now waving at him enthusiastically. I should get back to her, he said, standing up. But before I go. He pulled a pen from his pocket and wrote something on a receipt. He placed it gently on the table, not sliding it toward her like a demand. If you ever feel like having coffee with no expectations, he said, I'd like that. No pressure at all. He gave her a small nod, then returned to his table. Lena sat there long after, staring at the receipt, her heart steady in a way it hadn't been all evening. The rejection still hurt, but it no longer felt like the whole story. For the first time that night, she didn't feel small. She felt human, rejected on a blind date for being too fat. A poor girl sat in silence. Until a single dad from the next table walked up to her. Lena's fingers tapped nervously against the edge of the table, a small, almost unconscious rhythm that mirrored her racing thoughts. The cafe around her carried the usual warm chatter, but tonight it felt suffocating. Every laughter that echoed from nearby tables reminded her of her own loneliness. Every couple leaning in close, sharing bites of dessert, seemed to mock the emptiness at her own table. She had imagined something different when she accepted the blind date invitation, a chance at connection, maybe even a spark, but all she had found was judgment and rejection. Her date's words still echoed in her mind, sharp and cutting, even though he had tried to soften them with a forced smile. You're nice, he had said, but I just don't think this is going to work. Nice. It was always nice, never enough. Lena had grown accustomed to such statements, yet that didn't dull the sting. Every time, it was as if the world reminded her that she didn't fit into the expectations that others had placed on her. She let out a quiet sigh, glancing down at the glass of water in front of her. Condensation had formed, small droplets running down the side. She stared at them, feeling a strange kinship with the tiny rivulets. They too seemed trapped, unable to escape the surface, much like she felt trapped in her own body and in the judgments of others. Her mind wandered to the countless times she had been told to change, her weight, her appearance, her demeanor. The dieting advice, the well-meaning but cutting comments from friends, the constant reminders from strangers who believed they had the right to assess her worth based on her looks. Lena had spent years trying to blend into the background, trying to be polite, trying to be acceptable. And yet, no matter how hard she tried, it never seemed to be enough. She considered leaving the cafe, walking out into the cool night air and disappearing into the anonymity of the city streets. But something held her in place, a stubborn hope, perhaps, that not all encounters ended with rejection. That maybe, just maybe, there could be someone who saw her beyond the surface. That's when she noticed him. He wasn't rushing or looming over her. He simply approached with a calm, unassuming presence, his eyes gentle and kind. Excuse me, he said softly, I don't want to intrude, but are you all right? Lena blinked, startled by the question. She had expected glances, maybe pity, but not genuine concern. She forced a small nod. I will be, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. The man smiled faintly, a warm expression that didn't carry judgment. Would it be all right if I sat for a moment? No pressure at all. Lena hesitated. Part of her wanted to retreat further into herself, to avoid the possibility of another disappointment. Yet there was something reassuring about him, something that made her want to trust him, even without knowing his intentions. "Okay," she said softly, for a moment. He took the chair beside her with care, his presence calm and grounding. "I'm Daniel," he said. "I promise, I'm not here to fix anything." Lena chuckled quietly, the sound surprising even to her. "Good," she said. "Because I'm not fixable." He smiled again, unbothered. "I don't believe that," he replied simply, and it was enough to ease a small portion of the tension that had been coiled tight in her chest. They started with small talk, the kind that didn't require pretense. The music in the cafe, the softness of the lighting, the gentle hum of conversation around them. Daniel spoke of his daughter, Emma, and the little adventures they had together. Lena found herself laughing, genuinely, for the first time that evening. It was liberating, this effortless connection, and it made the earlier rejection feel distant, like a shadow fading in the light. Eventually, Lena spoke of the blind date, the words spilling out with a mix of vulnerability and frustration. "He said he wasn't attracted to me," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel listened without interruption, his gaze steady. "That's his loss," he said simply, the words carrying more weight than any shallow compliment could have. Lena shook her head. "People always say that, but it doesn't feel true when it keeps happening." Daniel considered her words carefully. "Maybe it's not happening because there's something wrong with you. Maybe it's happening because the wrong people keep getting access to you." The words lingered, strange but comforting. Lena had spent so long believing that her worth was measured by the acceptance of others. To hear someone suggest that the problem wasn't her, but the people she encountered, felt like a revelation. A small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "I never thought of it that way," she admitted. Daniel glanced at his daughter, who was absorbed in her coloring at the next table. "I should get back to her," he said, standing up. "But before I go..." He pulled a pen from his pocket and wrote something on a receipt, placing it gently in front of her. "If you ever want coffee with no expectations, I'd like that. No pressure." He gave her a reassuring nod before returning to his table, leaving Lena holding the small slip of paper, staring at it as if it contained some secret message. The rejection she had endured earlier still lingered, but it no longer felt like the final word. For the first time that evening, she felt seen, recognized not for her body, not for what she lacked, but for who she was. Sitting there, Lena realized that rejection didn't define her. It hadn't broken her. Instead, it had clarified something essential: not everyone deserved her attention, and not every opinion mattered. The right people, the ones who truly saw her, would arrive when the time was right. And sometimes, that arrival came from the most unexpected places. A single dad at the next table, a stranger who saw her humanity before her appearance. She carefully folded the receipt and slipped it into her pocket. The evening was no longer about loss or rejection. It was about possibility, about the quiet hope that maybe, finally, things could be different. And for the first time in a long while, Lena allowed herself to believe that the world held more than disappointment. That it held connection, kindness, and perhaps even love, waiting patiently just beyond the next table. The cafe continued to buzz around her, but Lena no longer felt invisible. She felt strong, grounded, and open to whatever came next. Tonight had reminded her that even in the moments of deepest humiliation, life could surprise you. Even in rejection, there was room for hope, and even in the loneliest seats, there could be someone willing to see you, truly see you, and walk across the room just to let you know you mattered. Lena took a deep breath, letting the warmth of that realization settle inside her. She looked around the cafe one last time before standing, her steps lighter than they had been when she arrived. The night was far from over, and she knew that the path ahead would not always be easy. But for the first time in a long time, she believed that it might be worth walking, especially if she had the courage to let the right people into her life. And sometimes, it took just a small act of kindness, a single dad, a simple question, a quiet gesture, to remind her that she was worthy of more than rejection. That she was worthy of connection, of laughter, and perhaps, in time, of love. Rejected on a blind date for being too fat, a poor girl sat in silence. Until a single dad from the next table walked up to her. Lena stayed seated, her hands resting on the table as if they could anchor her to the moment, prevent her from being swept away by the tide of embarrassment and hurt. The cafe around her seemed both comforting and suffocating at once. People laughed, couples leaned into one another, servers moved gracefully between tables, yet none of it reached her. Her date had gone, leaving behind only the echo of his polite dismissal. "You're nice," but, those words had ended the conversation, but not the weight of them, which pressed down on her chest like a heavy stone. She traced the rim of her cup absent-mindedly, feeling the cool ceramic beneath her fingers. Every slight gesture reminded her that she had been seen and found lacking. She had tried so hard, her hair had been neatly brushed, her outfit chosen carefully to feel confident without drawing unwanted attention, her smile rehearsed in the mirror a dozen times. But nothing could hide the truth that others would always judge her by her body first. Lena let her eyes wander to the other tables, noticing the effortless connection between couples and friends. Their ease made her own solitude feel heavier, yet also sparked a faint, stubborn hope that she wasn't destined to remain unseen forever. Maybe the right person wouldn't notice the superficial details first. Maybe someone could see past all of the judgment she had grown accustomed to. It was then that she noticed him. He didn't approach quickly or intrusively, and he didn't look around as if searching for approval. He simply came to her table with an air of calm assurance, someone whose presence seemed to slow the world down for just a moment. "Excuse me," he said softly, "I hope I'm not disturbing you. Are you okay?" Lena blinked, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. No one had asked if she was okay in a long time. She nodded, hesitant but touched by the gesture. I will be," she said quietly. The man offered a small, understanding smile. "Would it be all right if I sat here for a bit? I promise I won't intrude." Something in his voice made her want to trust him. She wasn't sure why, but she felt a sense of safety she hadn't felt in years. "Yes," she replied, almost automatically, "for a bit." He sat down slowly, careful not to crowd her, and introduced himself. "I'm Daniel. I'm not here to fix anything or to make things awkward." Lena laughed quietly, a sound that felt almost foreign in her ears. "Good," she said. "Because I'm not fixable." He smiled, unbothered. "I don't believe that," he said simply, and somehow, that reassurance was enough to ease a fraction of the tension that had tightened her chest. They began with casual conversation, the kind that didn't require Lena to hide or perform. They spoke of the soft music playing in the cafe, of the smell of freshly baked bread, of the little details of life that often went unnoticed. Daniel mentioned his daughter, Emma, and the little adventures they shared, how she always asked the hardest questions, how she drew fantastical creatures in the margins of her coloring books. Lena found herself laughing, genuinely and without effort, the sound surprising her. The laughter was like a balm, washing away the sting of earlier rejection, even if only temporarily. Finally, Lena spoke of the blind date. She confessed the words that had cut deepest. "He said he wasn't attracted to me," she said, voice trembling slightly. Daniel listened without interruption. When he spoke, it was with a calm assurance that made her feel seen. "That's his loss," he said simply, but she could feel the weight of it, the truth behind it. Lena shook her head. "People always say that, but it doesn't feel real when it keeps happening." Daniel considered her words, his gaze steady and patient. "Maybe it's not happening because there's something wrong with you. Maybe it's happening because the wrong people keep finding you." The word struck her. She had spent so long believing that her worth was tied to the approval of others, that rejection meant she wasn't enough. But Daniel's words suggested something different. That the problem wasn't her at all, but those who failed to see her true value. A small, tentative smile crossed her lips. "I never thought of it that way," she admitted softly. Daniel glanced back at his daughter, who was now waving at him from their table. "I should get back to her," he said, standing. "But before I do." He pulled a pen from his pocket, scribbled something on a receipt, and placed it gently in front of her. "If you ever want coffee with no expectations, I'd like that. No pressure." He nodded reassuringly and returned to his table. Lena stared at the receipt, turning it over in her hands, feeling its weight differently than any other slip of paper. The earlier rejection still stung, but now it felt different. It no longer defined her or dictated her worth. She realized that she had been looking for validation in the wrong places, seeking acceptance from those who were incapable of seeing her true self. She allowed herself to breathe deeply, noticing the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. The cafe's warmth, once oppressive, now felt comforting. People moved around her, but she no longer felt invisible. She was present, alive, and recognized, if only by one person who had crossed the room to show kindness. The receipt in her hand was more than just a gesture. It was a reminder that connection could happen unexpectedly, that the world could offer moments of compassion even in the aftermath of hurt. For the first time that evening, Lena felt the possibility of something more, a friendship, a bond, perhaps even love. She thought about all the times she had been told she needed to change to be worthy of affection, and she realized that she hadn't needed to change at all. The right people would come into her life naturally, without demands or conditions. They would see her for who she was, and they would appreciate it. Lena folded the receipt carefully and placed it in her pocket, a small talisman of hope. She stood, feeling lighter than she had all evening, and took one last look around the cafe. The world seemed brighter now, filled with potential rather than judgment. Rejected on a blind date for being too fat, a poor girl sat in silence, until a single dad from the next table walked up to her. Lena remained seated, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the table, as if gripping it could keep her tethered to reality and prevent the wave of humiliation from sweeping her away. The cafe hummed with its usual warmth, the low murmur of conversation and occasional laughter wrapping around her, yet she felt utterly alone. Every smile, every glance between couples seemed to emphasize her solitude. Her blind date had left minutes ago, and with him went her brief hope for a connection, leaving behind a hollow ache that gnawed quietly at her heart. She replayed the encounter in her mind. The careful pause in his eyes, the subtle tightening of his lips, the polite but dismissive words, "You're nice, but, nice." It always came down to nice, never enough to make him stay. She had dressed carefully, chosen her outfit to be flattering yet comfortable, brushed her hair until it shone, and practiced talking naturally in front of the mirror. None of it mattered. The world, it seemed, would always prioritize appearances over the essence of a person. Her gaze fell to the glass of water in front of her. Tiny droplets slid down its sides, slow and deliberate, like little reminders of time passing and opportunities lost. She felt trapped in that moment, trapped in a reality that constantly reminded her she was never enough. She thought of the countless times she had been judged, of the whispered remarks and blunt assessments that followed her like shadows. Diet advice, comparisons, well-meaning but cutting words, all of them piled together, leaving a weight she had learned to carry silently. The thought of leaving the cafe flickered through her mind. She could walk out, disappear into the night, and let the cold air replace the warmth of judgment. Yet something kept her rooted to the chair. Perhaps it was a stubborn glimmer of hope, a belief that not everyone was blind to what mattered most. Maybe, just maybe, there was someone who could see beyond the exterior, someone who could notice her worth without conditions. And then she noticed him. He approached her table slowly, not aggressively, not intrusively, just calmly, as though his presence belonged there naturally. "Excuse me," he said softly, "I hope I'm not disturbing you. Are you okay?" Lena blinked, taken aback. Seldom had anyone asked about her well-being with genuine concern. She nodded faintly, unsure if she wanted to admit the turmoil inside her. I will be, she replied quietly, though she wasn't entirely certain it was true. His eyes held a kindness she hadn't encountered in a long time. Would it be all right if I sat here for a moment? I promise I won't intrude. She hesitated. Her instincts told her to retreat, to protect herself from further disappointment, yet something about his voice, his calm demeanor, made her want to trust him. Yes, she said softly, for a moment. He sat down carefully, not leaning in too close, his posture relaxed and respectful. I'm Daniel, he said. I'm not here to fix anything or judge you. Lena let out a small laugh, surprised by her own reaction. Good, she said. Because I'm not fixable. He smiled gently. I don't believe that, he said simply, and that statement carried more reassurance than she could articulate. For the first time that evening, she felt a small portion of her tension lift. They began to converse about inconsequential things at first. The music playing softly, the aroma of fresh coffee, the slight chill in the evening air outside the windows. Daniel mentioned his daughter, Emma, and their little adventures together, trips to the park, the way she drew creatures that only existed in her imagination, her endless questions that challenged even his patience. Lena listened, fascinated, and found herself laughing freely, without pretense or effort. The conversation slowly shifted to her own experiences. She hesitated before revealing the cause of her current desolation. He said he wasn't attracted to me, she murmured, her voice tinged with sadness. Daniel's gaze remained steady. That's his loss, he said, not dismissing her feelings but affirming her value. Lena shook her head. People always say that, but it doesn't feel real when it happens over and over. Daniel considered her words thoughtfully. Maybe it's not because there's something wrong with you. Maybe it's because the wrong people keep crossing your path. The idea lingered, unfamiliar but comforting. Lena had spent years believing that her worth was measured by acceptance and approval. The notion that rejection might reflect more on others than on her own value was revolutionary. A faint smile appeared on her lips. I never thought about it like that, she admitted softly. Daniel glanced at his daughter, who was deeply absorbed in coloring at the next table. I should get back to her, he said, rising from his seat. But before I go. He scribbled something on a receipt and gently placed it in front of her. If you ever want coffee with no expectations, I'd like that. No pressure. He gave a reassuring nod before returning to his table. Lena held the receipt, turning it over in her fingers, feeling a strange sense of weight and significance. The sting of rejection was still there, but now it seemed less defining, less permanent. She realized that the people who failed to see her weren't worthy of her energy, and that true recognition could appear when she least expected it. She took a deep breath, allowing herself to feel the warmth of the cafe in a new way. She was present, visible, and for the first time in the evening, she felt acknowledged, if only by one thoughtful person. The receipt wasn't just paper. It was proof that connection could happen in small, unexpected moments, and that kindness could emerge where it was least expected. Lena thought about the years she had spent changing herself, trying to fit into a mold that society dictated. Now she understood that she had never needed to alter who she was to be seen. The right people, those who valued her essence, would come into her life naturally, without conditions or expectations. She carefully folded the receipt and placed it in her pocket, a tangible reminder of hope. The evening had transformed from one of rejection and self-doubt into one filled with possibility. She allowed herself to imagine future encounters, moments of genuine laughter, and connections untainted by superficial judgment. As she stood, Lena felt lighter, freer than she had when she first entered the cafe. The city outside beckoned, full of opportunities and experiences waiting to be discovered. The night was no longer a reminder of failure, but a testament to resilience, to the enduring potential for unexpected kindness. Walking toward the door, she realized that life had its own rhythm, a way of teaching lessons through pain and joy alike. Rejection could illuminate the difference between those who were blind to her value and those who truly mattered. Even a single act of consideration, like Daniel's, could ripple through a moment, shifting perspective and offering hope. Lena stepped into the evening air, carrying with her the quiet certainty that she was worthy of connection, worthy of laughter, and, in time, worthy of love. She felt the city hum with possibilities, each light and shadow a reminder that her life was unfolding, one small but meaningful interaction at a time. The night, once heavy with rejection, now belonged to hope. It belonged to the unexpected kindness of strangers, to the possibility that the right people might appear when least expected, and to the understanding that self-worth was not determined by the fleeting opinions of others. Lena moved forward with a newfound confidence, a quiet assurance that the world, despite its challenges, held the potential for recognition, acceptance, and genuine connection. She allowed herself to smile, a smile not rehearsed or cautious, but authentic and radiant. The path ahead was uncertain, yes, but she was ready to walk it, open to the small miracles and gestures that made life beautiful. And sometimes, she realized, all it took was a single moment, a single gesture of kindness, for everything to begin to change. Rejected on a blind date for being too fat, a poor girl sat in silence, until a single dad from the next table walked up to her. Lena stayed seated, her hands clasped loosely in her lap, as if keeping still might somehow protect her from the embarrassment that had settled over her like a heavy cloak. The cafe continued its low hum around her, people talking, laughing, the occasional clink of a coffee cup, yet she felt entirely isolated. Just minutes ago, she had been on a blind date, full of hope, and now she was left with the bitter taste of rejection. Her date had left hastily, leaving behind only the memory of the polite but dismissive words, "You're nice, but, nice. Always nice, never enough to make anyone stay." She stared at her untouched drink, watching tiny droplets of condensation meander slowly down the glass. Each one seemed symbolic, like time dripping past opportunities she feared she might never have again. Lena had always tried to fit in, to be acceptable to others. She had dressed carefully, brushed her hair until it shone, practiced smiling in the mirror, all to present herself in the best possible light. But none of it mattered, the world judged her by appearances, and her weight seemed to overshadow everything else. Her thoughts wandered to the countless rejections she had faced, not just romantic ones, but social and professional, too. Every whispered comment, every pointed comparison, every seemingly harmless piece of advice about dieting or presentation had piled on top of each other, leaving her with a quiet, persistent pain. She had grown used to being overlooked, to being assessed superficially, but it didn't make the hurt any easier to bear. The idea of leaving the cafe crossed her mind. She could step outside into the cool night, walk into the anonymity of the city streets, and temporarily escape the sting of rejection. But something kept her rooted. Perhaps it was stubborn hope, the faint belief that there were people who could see beyond appearances, people who might recognize her worth without judgment. It was then that she noticed him. He approached without hurry, without intrusion, just a calm presence that felt almost intentional in the chaos of the cafe. "Excuse me," he said softly, "I don't mean to disturb you, but are you okay?" Lena blinked, surprised by the genuine concern in his voice. Few people ever asked about her well-being without an agenda. She nodded faintly, her voice soft, I will be." There was a kindness in his eyes, a quiet reassurance that made her want to believe him. "Would it be all right if I sat here for a moment?" he asked. "I promise I won't intrude." She hesitated, torn between instinctive self-protection and the rare opportunity to trust someone. "Yes," she said softly, "for a moment." He lowered himself into the chair beside her with care, not crowding her space, and introduced himself. "I'm Daniel. I'm not here to fix you or judge you. I just thought you might need someone to talk to." Lena let out a soft laugh, surprised by her own response. "Good," she said. "Because I'm not fixable." Daniel smiled gently. "I don't believe that," he said simply. His words carried an authenticity that made her shoulders loosen just a little. They began with light conversation, the kind that didn't require her to perform or explain herself. They spoke about the cafe, the music, the aroma of fresh coffee, and the little details of daily life. Daniel spoke of his daughter, Emma, and the adventures they shared. Trips to the park, the fantastical creatures she created in her coloring books, the endless questions she asked that challenged even him. Lena listened and laughed freely, a genuine sound she hadn't heard in a long time. Eventually, the conversation shifted to her experience on the blind date. Her voice was hesitant, tinged with vulnerability. "He said he wasn't attracted to me," she admitted, staring down at her hands. Daniel's gaze held her without judgment. "That's his loss," he said calmly. Lena shook her head. "People always say that, but it doesn't feel real when it happens again and again." Daniel thought carefully before speaking. "Maybe it's not happening because there's something wrong with you. Maybe it's because the wrong people keep finding you." The words were like a revelation, challenging everything she had believed. Lena had always assumed rejection reflected her inadequacy, her inability to meet others' expectations. Daniel's perspective offered a different truth. Perhaps it was never about her, but about those who failed to recognize her worth. A tentative smile crossed her lips. "I never thought about it that way," she admitted. Daniel glanced at his daughter, who was absorbed in her coloring at the next table. "I should get back to her," he said, standing. "But before I do..." He scribbled something on a receipt and placed it gently in front of her. "If you ever want coffee with no expectations, I'd like that. No pressure." He nodded reassuringly and returned to his table. Lena stared at the receipt, turning it over in her fingers, feeling a strange sense of gravity and hope. The rejection from earlier still stung, but now it seemed different, less defining. She realized that the people who didn't see her value weren't worth her attention, and that genuine recognition could arrive when she least expected it. She took a deep, steadying breath, letting the warmth of the cafe sink in around her. She felt visible, acknowledged, and, for the first time that evening, understood, even if by only one person. The receipt became more than a simple gesture. It was a reminder that connection could emerge in the smallest, quietest ways, and that kindness was not always loud or grandiose. Lena reflected on the years she had spent changing herself to gain acceptance. Now she understood that she had never needed to alter who she was to be valued. The right people would come naturally into her life, those who appreciated her essence rather than surface-level appearances. Carefully folding the receipt, she placed it in her pocket, a tangible symbol of possibility. The evening, which had begun in disappointment, had transformed into an affirmation of resilience, of hope, and of the unexpected moments that could change everything. As she rose to leave, Lena felt lighter, more grounded, and open to the experiences the world might offer. The city outside stretched before her like a canvas, full of possibilities waiting to be explored. The night no longer represented rejection but the potential for connection, understanding, and even love. She realized that life had a way of teaching lessons through moments of both pain and grace. Rejection could clarify, showing her who was blind to her worth and who could truly see her. Sometimes, it took just one small act of kindness, a single dad asking if she was okay, a simple invitation to coffee, to transform a night of despair into one of hope. Stepping into the cool evening air, Lena held the small receipt as a reminder that she was worthy of being seen, appreciated, and understood. She smiled genuinely, not the practiced, polite smile she had worn for years, but an authentic expression of newfound confidence. The path ahead was uncertain, yet she felt ready to walk it. Each step held the potential for unexpected joy, for connection, and for the kind of kindness that could transform ordinary moments into something extraordinary. The night, once heavy with judgment and rejection, now belonged to hope, to growth, and to the quiet understanding that she was enough, exactly as she was. With each breath, Lena embraced the lesson the evening had taught her. That sometimes, one small gesture could change everything, that love and recognition often came in ways she never expected, and that her worth was inherent, untouchable by the fleeting opinions of others. She walked forward into the night with her head held high, ready for whatever possibilities awaited her next.